Afternoon. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Friday. When is the midterm for this class, young people?
March 3rd.
Excellent. So that's next Wednesday. So please prepare earnestly. To assist with that, I want to go over again a couple of things that we had talked about previously. Again, all of this information you all should have. So I'm going to go through this pretty swiftly. And as always, just make sure that you see how it connects to all the things we've been talking about throughout the semester. Don't try and look at this in isolated chapters. But again, as we've talked about before, just walking through the historical evolution of urban development. And chapter 4 speaks to, again, the Chicago School, which is a philosophy, a theoretical way of approaching the social sciences. And the main thing about this is the introduction of urban ecology. When we talk about ecology, a word that should come to mind is environment. In this case, we're looking at the social environment. And the social environment of Chicago was transforming the individuals that lived there in a way that we didn't really fully understand and kind of took for granted as human beings, and believing that people might be possessed by the devil, that they come from an inferior race of human beings, and their behavior could be explained this way. So the main thing, again, that the scholars here did is to look at the role the environment played in shaping the individual, which is good social scientists, we again, see almost as intuitive today, but it was not so at the time. And we talked about shock cities, and keep in mind we talked about the Industrial Revolution last chapter. And we does anybody recall what was the shock city of that period, of that early period that we talked about? What was the shock city? Without looking at your notes, so you're not going to have your notes on Wednesday. Obviously, I can't give you extra credit points for reading back to me. I could potentially get somebody that's 8 years old to do that. But we talked about this stuff enough where you all should be able to have some type of comprehension of this. If I ask y'all, like if I'm going through things about the Chicago school now, and I ask y'all about this later, there will be an expectation that you process enough for this conversation where you can retain it. So does anybody recall the Industrial Revolution, the city in Europe, where the Industrial Revolution really began to kind of spiral and create an urban environment unlike anything that had been seen before?
Wasn't it London?
No, close. So that was Manchester, England was the first shock city. Manchester, England was the first shock city.
Yes, sir.
And again, this is just a city that has significant growth. And again, like you probably get asked this again, so it might not be a bad idea to write this down. And don't just like I said, when you write it down in chapter 3 and it's looked at as isolated information, where these are the kind of things when you're taking notes, like you should put it here as well to kind of like help you make these connections. And then after you take these notes, take some time to look at them, like so that the information will stick. So Shock City again is a symbolic, again, a city that just grows rapidly in a very short amount of time. And why was the city growing so rapidly? Why were so many
Oh,
people coming?
oh. You want well, so basically during the Industrial Revolution with the factories and the machines being made and created, products and items were able to be produced at a faster rate. So cities were able to be developed easier, and technology was just advancing. So the time started to advance as well.
Very good. So again, with the Industrial Revolution, which we talked about last chapter, where you had more and more factory work being done, and if you wanted to make a good living without with having limited skills, big cities and increasingly became the places to go. New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Boston, New Orleans, Cincinnati, all of these cities' populations really began to explode in the 1800s. And we see this transformation again where you won't be tested on numbers, but you see the populations of the three largest cities again, and from the six largest cities from 1850 and going to 1900. Chicago again is nowhere on the list, but by 1900, it had exploded rapidly, and by 1930 was the second most populous city in the country. And very quickly it became characterized as a place of social disorganization. Keep in mind that previous to the Industrial Revolution, most people lived in rural environments in small groups. So now you have these people again coming from all across the world, Italy, Ireland, Poland, many blacks coming from the rural South. And it created environments that, were defined by social alienation, large, high levels of suicide, greater rates of child abuse. The divorce rate was climbing. You had more juvenile delinquency, a lot more crime. And again, the attempt here was to blame this on the people, that because these people here are coming and they're bringing their bad morals and values to this space, that's the reason why, you're seeing this social disorganization. And what again are some of the things that characterize the social disorganization? What are some of the things that characterize the social disorganization? So what are some of the examples of the social disorganization that they saw when some of those people started to come out to Chicago? What are some of the examples?
People, I want to say people were, when I want to say, but people were speaking their own language and people didn't know what they were saying, so just want to talk to them or just say, okay, well, if you can speak our language, don't come here.
Not as much with that. That definitely did create some conflict at times for sure, in terms all the people, the different tongues. But the main examples of the social disorganization was suicide, child abuse, divorce, crime, and things like that. And it was believed that again that this was happening because individuals were bringing their bad morals and values. But instead, the scholars at the University of Chicago believed that it more than the people, because again, these people in the places they were coming from, they did not necessarily have those type of conditions. When Black people were coming up from rural South Carolina, when people were coming over from Poland, when people were coming over from Italy, you didn't see those, again, these same people would react differently within those spaces. So they wanted to, wonder what was it about this environment, this ecology that created the urbanism, again, the psychology that comes along with city life that is going to affect almost anybody that comes into these spaces. And the effects of coming into these spaces, again, would be social disorganization that's defined by suicide, child abuse, divorce. Again, one of the things we talk about in social sciences quite often is empiricism. Empiricism, again, is using numbers and data, well, using data, numbers in particular, to try and display social outcomes. So again, we collect a lot of data on the rate of COVID to try and see how we should respond to that. Urbanism again refers to again a state of mind where again coming into this environment, it says that again that individuals, no matter who you are, is going to create a different mindset, a different approach to the world. These approaches were defined by cosmopolites, the unmarried and childless. Stevie, you had mentioned the language barriers, so you would have many ethnic villages where um, Chinese in Chinatown, they could speak their native languages. In the Jewish communities, people could speak, their native languages. Many again came from, places like Poland, Ukraine. You had Greek town, you had Little Italy. Little Village is a prominent Hispanic area of the city. You would have many people that would be deprived, where we talked about before. One of the main, although people are coming for these factory jobs and promising hope of a better life, there are many people who arrived, in places like Cincinnati, and Cleveland, Detroit, and Chicago, and they found that there just weren't enough jobs, to go around. There were more people than jobs. And again, this rate of migration, I mean, was rapid. You have like, literally thousands of people coming into these cities every single day. It's not jobs for everybody. So many of those people are going to be deprived and lived, again, we talk about, the concentric zones. So those would be the people that would kind of live far away from the central business district where many of the jobs were. Many of these would eventually fall into the trapped and downwardly mobile. Again, they came into urban environments to experience upward mobility, but that wasn't happening for everybody. Again, a lot of times cities are characterized as places where you have like detachment and a lack of community, but you have, again, many communities to subcultures where, again, whether you're a Chinese American who wants to live in Chinatown, we talked about, again, how like many people that have value systems or behaviors that don't necessarily fall into like, may not suit them well in small communities, such as being a homosexual, that you could come into an urban environment and, blend in because, nobody really has time to, focus on those type of behaviors. There's so many other things going on. So only cities can really attract enough people to form subcultures where, again, no matter what you're on, skateboarding cats, I'm sure you've heard of hipsters and stuff like that. Those things develop in urban environments where, again, you can have, you can be a weirdo, if you will, in a way that is a lot more difficult in a smaller group. Again, we talk about ecology. It's the environment, the environment, the environment, the environment. If I asked y'all about this a month ago, we gonna all remember this, right? Sure. So you have more and more economic competition. Again, you have thousands of people coming into these cities, day after day. They quickly see that, in spite of the promise of, a robust economy and a wide swath of jobs, that's not always the case. And there's not only is there competition for jobs, there's competition for almost every resource. And again, keep this in mind for modern times: education, healthcare, access to like good and decent policing, and of course, access to housing. So you would have and again, when you see something in italics, you want to really study that closely. You would have the process of invasion and succession. These concepts are going to be important. And again, even though the final exam is not going to be cumulative, the final exam is not going to be cumulative. Education, is. Meaning that, it should not be, okay, let me turn off all the information I learned in the first half and boom, it's a blank slate in the second half. So there are going to be many things that we talk about in the second half, particularly as it relates to modern forms of urbanization. It's going to be a lot of things we talk about in the second half of the class that won't make as much sense if you don't understand this first half material. So when we talk about things like invasion and succession, this is like, really germane to our modern discussions of gentrification, a term that you all no doubt have heard of before. What do we mean by gentrification? When you hear that term, and I wouldn't expect you to be a master of this concept now, but again, when we talk about taking notes, it's not just writing down what you see on the screen. The discussion is the most important thing. And when we talk about gentrification, what does that mean? These are the kind of things that you want to also include.
Would that be like, in a sense, like changing like the, I guess like the character or mindset of an area, or in a sense?
It definitely does that. It's just a physical displacement of one group with another, particularly as it relates to like, racial displacements.
Yes, sir.
So this is how, like, you have a place like Harlem, New York, which has long been in many ways seen as kind of, the capital of Black America, if you will, our cultural center. And today Harlem is majority white. You see cities like this, see this in cities all across the country. I've talked about, how like I'll come, when I come home oftentimes to Chicago, and I'll see like, going through the South Side, which again, like in many ways, if Harlem was the center, like, the South Side of Chicago, in many ways, it's kind of be like, a second capital, if you will. Large hub of Black culture throughout, the late 19th and 20th century. And you see more and more white folks living in those areas. So we'll talk about that in great detail later on. So please keep these discussions in mind, because it's really important in terms like, and it does when you talk about the mindset of a city. Obviously, this transformation is going to kind of change, the urbanism that you will see take place in these different locales. The concentric zone hypothesis is a really important concept that you want to familiarize yourself with. And again, keep in mind, all of this is related to our discussion of urban ecology. When we talk about urban ecology, what are we speaking about again?
How social environment affects the urban environment or settlement.
The urban mindset, and individual. So in this regard, like, yes, there's urban, but if you've been in any big city, you know that, not all slices of the city are cut out equally. So even in this one environment of Chicago, you have actually many different environments that, depending upon where you live, you're going to be influenced by vastly different things. So again, like in the text itself, they actually show you the physical map. And by and large, even though this was like, this hypothesis was crafted back in the 1930s and 40s, this still very much holds true. So you have the central business district, the zone in transition, the zone of working men's homes, the residential zone, the commuter zone, etc. In all of these different environments within one city would, again, kind of create different behaviors. There have been some modifications, again, where although this was introduced in Chicago, at the University of Chicago's within their sociology program, still the top-ranking program today, that this model was introduced into other cities as well. And it didn't fit as perfectly in other cities, because there are some cities that have multiple centers, if you will. There's not just one central business district. But what does often remain is that the further isolated that you get from those business areas, the more poverty you see, the more crime you see, poor access to schools and healthcare. Much like we talked about in Manchester, England, in the last chapter, of how, again, the city was in many ways kind of set up in a way where the rich folks in Manchester could kind of be shielded from all the poverty that was going on in Manchester at the onset of the Industrial Revolution. So much like now, even though you may hear about, crime in Chicago and stuff like that, it's not, that's not happening everywhere. There are many communities where people live, and it's almost like that's not even going on, that they watch it on the news and it's so like a foreign country or something. So this social disorganization, and what are some of the examples, again, of some of the social disorganization that we just talked about?
That was suicide, the crime rate,
Child abuse.
Yeah.
And juvenile delinquency.
Good.
That's right.
And these things shouldn't be that difficult to remember and recall, because for the most part, it's the same things that go on now.
Right.
That in some parts of New York, again, you all have watched enough films alone, right, to understand that South Central Los Angeles is very different from Greater Los Angeles.
Right.
And listening, y'all say y'all be fans of rap music, you understand the trap of Atlanta is different from what you may see in Buckhead or something. You really have to I really would encourage you to really just raise your social antennas a little bit, because there's a lot that you're already exposed to that should make these learning processes a lot easier. But again, your brain got to be active. The classes continue to work in a format where, y'all are taking notes and y'all just get things down and let me run enough game on Dr. Muhammad to get points for the day. But I'm not actually invested in trying to learn anything about this stuff. Like if you were like this stuff, you know, you all are too, like, you know, and I say this because I know how intelligent y'all are, and y'all are too intelligent for me to be asking y'all these basic questions, and y'all can't remember this stuff even, not even a week later, sometimes 5 or 10 minutes later. So we talk about urban planning. Why do we need to plan?
So every event or things that we do plan, so they'll be successful. So they won't end up eventually failing.
I mean, that's true, but based upon everything that we've talked about so far in this class, why is there a need for urban planning?
Well, they have to plan for like the jobs, the amount of food, developing and like creating more goods and I guess items that we need to essentially survive.
That's true. What were some of the things that was going on? So in the chapter on Chicago that we just talked about, what were some of the problems that they have there? And why did they have some of those problems?
Oh,
What's a shock city?
like basically how like how the population of the city grew dramatically.
Good. And what problems did that create?
Not enough, not enough homes.
Stephen?
I
Stephen?
said not enough jobs and not enough homes.
Good. What else?
Did that also affect the amount of food because that's more people, so that's more mouths to feed?
That's true. And when people didn't have jobs and stuff, what would they have to do sometimes?
They would end up potentially becoming poor, or they have to their living conditions wouldn't be as good because they can't afford to pay their bills or buy the essentials that they need to survive.
That's true, but for many people, that's not going to be an option. So what will they do? They're not just going to be poor.
Oh, they would go to committing crimes since they weren't getting paid enough.
Good. One extra credit point, Stephen. All right. They would commit crimes. So like the social disorganization that we talked about, right? Like this is, again, the neurons need to be firing, young people. Like when we're discussing, like, so all these people came all at once. They coming for all these jobs. It ain't enough jobs. It ain't enough houses. The crime and all that stuff is in many ways a response to that. That they come, like, again, they've had promise of a better life. A better life ain't there. I was told I could get work, I couldn't. So now I'm going to go out here and I'm going to steal, I'm going to rob, I'm going to like assault people. I'm going to like, gamble, I'm going to bootleg. I'm going to do what I got to do to get this paper. Now I ain't finna just sit here and be poor. Like that's like, humans like are, survivalists. So people are going to do what they have to do, whether this be like, 1920 Chicago or 2020 Atlanta. These are fundamental laws of nature. So as a result of that kind of social disorganization, where they didn't really plan for it, just come up, get jobs. Come on, everybody. Hey, it's jobs. Yay. But they didn't really plan for all that stuff. So this chapter is a direct response to the things that happened in the last 2 chapters. You had this industrial revolution where it totally shifted the way everybody lived. That first happened in Europe. What was the first city where the industrial revolution set forth?
That was Manchester, England.
Correct. So from there, they would design their city in such a way where, like, okay, look, the people that work in the factories, y'all live over here. The stuff that's going on in the poor communities, we don't even know nothing about that. But the fear was that if they did not create, get this social disorganization that they saw in Chicago, Philadelphia, Cincinnati, other places, that, it would eventually affect the rich people. So they then began to have some urban planning. Again, this chapter only makes sense if you truly understand, not just write stuff down and try and see if I can guess the right answer, but actually understand. Which again, I've been stressing, I was gonna say since January, but I've been stressing this since I've met y'all. So the physical environment, again, as we talked about, influences and constrains our behavior. What does that refer to? There's another term that we can use to describe this, where the physical environment influences and constrains our behavior. The Chicago school came up with it. Urban ecology.
It was something about urban, bro.
So the physical environment influences and constrains behavior. Um, again, the city planners felt that as a result of this, that if we can plan and construct a city in such a way, since we know that the environment affects behavior, that we can create an environment that affects their behavior positively. So the whole process of urban planning was like, designed to do that, to affect the urban ecology, which we talked about maybe 5 or 10 minutes ago. And I stressed like 3, 4, 5 times. Some of the notable city planners include Daniel Burnham, Le Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright. And again, some of the things that they wanted to do, for example, with Burnham, have more public parks, wider boulevards, some really dope architecture. Again, the Garden City, to try and have a balance between, nature and some agricultural base. Well, also, again, the urban environment that they couldn't realistically turn back from at this stage. Now, the Radiant City, again, which they began to introduce in Paris, would have many ramifications for housing in America in the 20th century. So he hated the cities were being designed to try and reflect a very unique personality. So he hated the way that Paris was. He hated the way that New York was set up with all the skyscrapers and people were packed so close together. But we talked about, again, these cities have function. Why did they build a city like that? Why was New York built like that, where you had all those skyscrapers and why did they have so many skyscrapers in New York?
I guess to attract people to come there, for jobs and housing.
That's definitely true. But the main thing, again, they had to begin to build up because you had so many people. It's the biggest, most populated city in the country. You had so many people coming into, it's really a very small space. So they had to build up to be able to get everybody in. But you're right, definitely, corporations, absolutely, Stephen, would take hold of some of those skyscrapers, such as the MetLife building and the Woolworth building, places like that, as a way to kind of showcase their corporate muscle. But here they wanted to have they knew again that, Paris, again, also a very crowded, congested city, that they wanted to have high skyscrapers, but they wanted to have more open green space. And again, in New York City at the time, that was very rare to find. These buildings and this model would be how they would eventually structure the housing projects throughout much of the United States. Again, so in Chicago in particular, I think the largest ones actually in the country are the Robert Taylor homes. They don't exist anymore. A lot of these projects, and we're going to talk about this in great detail in the second half of the class. Again, environment, ecology affects behavior. And what they would quickly find, I won't say quickly find, it took them about 30, 40 years. But project living is not necessarily the most conducive to producing healthy social behaviors. We'll talk about some of the reasons, that is now, it doesn't really allow and facilitate the building of community. We talked about Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft before, where again, in the smaller rural communities, you can know your neighbors, you can have some fellowship with the community. With the way that these projects, the housing here was designed, that was a lot more difficult. Robert Moses, a very important figure, again, responsible for reshaping New York City. And he created, again, express systems and highway. And The extent that he was fully motivated to do this has been the subject of a more modern debate. But the consequence of the way that he designed it was that, it created a lot of segregation, even something small where there's parts of New York City where the bridges were built like, the overheads on the bridges were built so low to where buses couldn't get through there. And in that way, it made it like, where, if you were, many people in New York, regardless of their social class, don't have cars, but most of the working class almost certainly don't. And the only way that you can get to certain places in the city would be public transportation. And the city would be designed in such a way to kind of discourage that. Before we break, I want to get into some new material that is related to some of the things, again, that we've been talking about, though. And again, it's really important to meet these connections. I can't express how disappointed I am in our unwillingness to do this so far. The good news is we still got time. So I hope that we'll use it wisely. Experiencing strangers in the quest for public order, again, is connected to this notion that we talked about before. That in small rural communities, it's a lot more likely that you're going to know, your neighbors, your local politicians, all the folks on the school board, clergy. But in big urban environments, one of the things that really define them is a great deal of anonymity. And in this wasn't true everywhere, but certainly in my last place when I was living in Shia, I probably wouldn't even been able to tell you what my neighbors looked like. But it's important to note that, even though we've been this, there are absolutely some differences. But the scholarship shows that a lot of these differences are a bit overstated. That there's some overlap, between these. And then again, when we talk about taking notes, right? You see this up here, dichotomy. What does that mean?
Say it one more time.
Dichotomy. What does that mean?
The dichotomy.
Dichotomy. Like, are you looking at the screen? And I don't expect you to know it, but what I do expect you to do is to know that you don't know it and then take some steps to learn it. Because if you're writing down notes and you're writing down words, you don't know what they mean, like, how would that help you exactly? The good news for you all is that there's a lot of technology out here that can get this information for you very quickly. You might not even have to type nothing in. Siri, what does dichotomy mean? Don't just apply that for this class and this concept. But again, because I think a large part of and not reading and engaging the literature more is sometimes there can be an intimidation with some of these big words and stuff. But be not intimidated and stuff. Just do the work and kind of breaking down and deconstructing these concepts. But what it speaks to here is right that oftentimes we believe that things are are mutually exclusive. We can only put these in two categories, and there's no overlap, either black or white, either woman or man. And as we know, those concepts have blurred quite a bit in recent times, and most social concepts do. This is true when we talk about the rural and urban divide as well. The rural oftentimes is characterized by more intimate, personalized, primary relationships. Where urban life again is, are more anonymous, segmented, a lot of strangers who don't really know each other. And as we talked about, and we'll talk about more, again, urban environments have a lot of enclaves and subcultures where people actually do experience that same level of fellowship. And there are a lot of, again, a lot more isolation in rural environments and is sometimes given credit. But you do, no doubt about it, you do have to exist in a world of strangers. This again is going to make it where, and keep in mind, we talk about ecology, how the environment affects the individual. So it does begin to foster like a level of non-involvement. Non-involvement means like, look, just minding your damn business for the most part. If this doesn't have anything to do with you, and that isn't always good, as we'll talk about on Monday. There are some times where like, so if you see like, a neighbor being attacked or something like that in a small town and you hear somebody screaming, you'll feel more responsibility to go run and assist. In urban environments, oftentimes it's not true. So again, you see somebody doing something that you may not like, but in urban environments, again, there's more of a culture of non-involvement. That non-involvement, again, it goes two ways. And sometimes there can be some bad things that happen to get overlooked, but sometimes it can be where, again, that you may not like this transgender person. You may not like this hipster person. You may not like this person that is visibly of another religion. That's fine. You can still have those beliefs. But if you're going to live in New York and you're going to let stuff like that bother you, you're going to have some pretty long days. Because you're going to see a lot of things that are probably going to disturb your sensibilities. And you become numb to it pretty quickly. Your interactions, as a result, your interactions over time become free from more judgments. Because again, while you're sitting up there judging other people, Charles, you know what's happening to you? You're being judged too. So very quickly, you have to learn that, like, look, we have to, live and let live within these spaces. Again, that's not perfect. This is not to suggest that there isn't bigotry, racism, sexism, homophobia in New York. There is everywhere. But people that have these different lifestyles can feel a lot more comfort, and they can definitely feel a lot more fellowship with people around them in some of these urban environments. But again, here, right, we don't want to just make it out into one thing. So even here, you have what scholars have described as three social realms: the public, the parochial, and the private. As always, when you see something in italics, that's something you want to study very closely in preparing for the midterm. And when is the midterm again?
March 3rd.
March 3rd.
Excellent. On Monday, we'll begin our discussions by breaking down the private, parochial, and public in more detail. The Monday lecture will be pre-recorded, so it'll be available for you at this time to view, but you will not have to log on to Zoom. You'll go onto the YouTube channel to watch Monday's lecture.